Hello, everybody. Today is March 3rd, 2024, and I'm continuing reading my book, Travels with Nobody. And I'm going to begin chapter 3, Florence, y'all. And it's page 41. So here we go. The next day, day 3 of my trip across America, I got up, showered, checked out, and drove to a Waffle House for breakfast, where I had biscuits and sausage gravy and coffee. I left Columbus in the morning, a cloudy, dreary cold morning, but no rain. I got back on Interstate 71, following the signs for Cincinnati. It was early afternoon when I came up on Riverfront Stadium, home of the Cincinnati Reds. I followed the signs for Louisville, crossed the Ohio River into Kentucky. I remembered the water tower with "Florence, y'all" painted on it in big letters. My father's side grandparents had lived in Louisville, and our family trips years before had taken this same route. I was in Kentucky, gateway to the South. The weather started to clear in the afternoon. The car was running steadily, underpowered as always, but showing no signs of impending breakdown. In a couple of hours, I would be at Frank and Sarah's house. When I got close to Louisville, I called Frank and got directions to their house. It was easy enough to find, a little gray house in a new-looking subdivision, a basketball hoop over the garage door. It was around 5 o'clock when I arrived, the sun about to set. Frank was standing in the doorway when I arrived. Sarah was holding their new baby, a girl named Adele. Frank Jr. hid behind Frank's legs, holding a toy fire engine. Frank and I went into the kitchen. He offered me a beer. You ever have a Wheaties? He asked, reaching in the refrigerator. Wheaties? I said, not knowing what he was talking about. Wiedemann's beer. It's Kentucky beer, but they're closing down the brewery. He twisted off the caps and sat at the table. Frank took out a pack of cigarettes and asked if I smoke. I told him I didn't, but thanked him just the same. Good for you. Don't start. Sarah came in holding the baby, and I stood up to meet my niece. Frank Jr. looked at me from behind the doorway. Oh, did you hear about Grandma Phillips? She had a stroke. Dad called yesterday, Frank said. I didn't know it was a stroke. I arrived at their house just a couple hours after she'd been taken to the hospital. Grandpa was pretty upset, I said. No doubt, Frank said. I told Frank and Sarah about talking to Grandpa, that he had said that Grandma had been acting strange all day and then collapsed. So it had been a stroke after all. I told them of what he'd told me about Grandma not talking to him for years. Frank said that he recalled our mother saying a long time ago that our grandmother had spent some time in the hospital, a long time, maybe a year, back in the 50s, when Frank was just a boy, and before I was born. She had not said what the problem was, but Frank said that he and my older siblings had suspected that it was a psychiatric hospital. That night, we all went out for pizza. I was able to chat comfortably with Frank and Sarah. I had only met Sarah once before, a couple years back, when the family had gone to Kentucky for their wedding. But we all got along well. The next day, I noticed some pamphlets on their coffee table, a group called Witness for Peace. Those were Sarah's. She was active in their church and was one of the organizers of the group. I was curious about it. She explained that Witness for Peace started in response to the Reagan administration's support for the Contras in Nicaragua, a war she regarded as illegal and immoral. She told me that Witness for Peace trains and sends volunteers, American citizens, to Nicaragua to witness and report the consequences on the ground of the Contra War. The volunteers are sent to rural areas, the main targets of the Contras, also for the purpose of deterring attacks. The Contras would avoid attacking a village if they suspected an American might be there. Killing an American citizen would almost certainly lead to an end of American support for the war, Sarah explained. I was amazed. We talked about the wars in Central America, and she recommended several books and mentioned several good journalists who were covering the wars in Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala. Two I remember now were Alan Nairn and Chris Hedges. That conversation opened up opened up a whole new opportunity, I thought. I wondered what skills one would need to be a volunteer. I was excited about it. Sarah said that some knowledge of Spanish would be necessary, but it wasn't really a matter of skills as much as a moral commitment to put your life on the line for a cause you believe in. I would really have to read up, go to seminars, listen and learn. Then, if you feel that volunteering to be what is for all practical purposes being a human shield is worth risking whatever might happen, I mean, it is a war zone, she warned, then I can help. I hadn't known that Sarah was such an activist. I admired her for that. I thought about what it would mean to join that group. I was just a naive kid. I didn't know anything, well, hardly anything about Central America, only what I had read and what I'd seen on the TV news. Volunteering with Witness for Peace would be a life or death decision. I did feel that the Contras were terrible. Yes, the Contras' methods were well known, avoiding confrontations with the Sandinista military, instead attacking villages, sabotaging schools, clinics, farms, sawmills, even public toilets. That's right, I thought to myself. I had read that their training manuals actually included sabotage of toilets, flushing sponges or wads of cloth. How can that be in the best interests of the people? It was obvious to me the Contras were not fighting in the best interests of the people. Reagan himself had warned that the Sandinistas were going to make Nicaragua into another Cuba. I didn't know, but it seemed that one side was trying to build clinics and schools, and the other side was simply vandalizing those things and terrorizing the people. I believed the authors who wrote that the Sandinistas had near universal support of the Nicaraguan people. And I wondered, just how bad is Cuba? Would Cuba be so bad if not for the American economic embargo? And why the travel ban for American citizens to Cuba? Is there a truth that they are afraid would be revealed? I didn't know. I stayed a few days at Frank and Sarah's house. The kids were wonderful. Young Frank really liked fire engines. He had his toy fire engine that he played with all the time. One time, we were all watching TV in their den, the kids playing on the floor, when we heard sirens in the distance. Fire engines. They were, excuse me, they were coming closer. Then it became apparent that they were going to go right past Frank and Sarah's house. So Sarah grabbed baby Adele and we all ran out to the lawn to watch the procession go by. There were 3 or 4 of them, a hook and ladder and several pump trucks, all bright red, lights flashing, sirens blaring. Little Frank stood at the edge of the lawn and clapped as they went by. I still remember that. I don't remember why I didn't stay with them for Thanksgiving. Maybe they had other plans, or maybe to have it with Sarah's parents, who lived nearby. But for whatever reason, I got back on the road the day before Thanksgiving. I left after coffee and breakfast with Frank and Sarah and the kids. They all stood in the driveway to see me off, waving. I waved out the window until I rounded a corner and they were out of view. I got on Interstate 64 and took that all the way to St. Louis. The car was running steadily. Not having a radio made me pay more attention to how the car sounded than was healthy. I imagined it would be like what a bomber crew must have felt in World War II, flying, listening to the hum of the engines, hoping not to hear any sign of trouble. Sometimes I would turn the radio on to see if by happenstance I came into the range of a station that broadcast on 92.1 WSLE's frequency, but I never did find one. Why on earth did I not simply stop somewhere and buy a radio? I had enough money. Looking back on it now, I realize that I had plenty of money to cross the country on. Cheap motel rooms could be had for less than $10, $10 a night, sometimes only $6. Gas wasn't going to be a problem. I suppose I wanted to make sure I had as much money, as much possible, as much as possible for when I arrived in Olympia. That would most likely, I would most likely have to pay a month's rent and a security deposit when Kevin Paulson, Pat Wrigley, and I finally got a place to live. So I drove west on I-64 through southern Indiana, total radio silence. I crossed into the central time zone for the first time in my life. The line from that Billy Joel song, "You're My Home," crossed my mind. Indiana's early morning dew. I crossed the Wabash River into Illinois sometime in midday. The song in my mind changed. Now I was traveling through the jungle on the Wabash Cannonball. I remembered that song from the bluegrass festivals. I wondered who wrote it, but anyway, here was the Wabash River, and I was crossing it in my car. It had been sunny and cool when I left Louisville, but as I got west, it started to get cloudy. Just thin, broken clouds that glowed pleasantly in the sunlight. It was new territory for me. I had never been west of Louisville before. Everything now was something I was experiencing for the first time. Flat land with endless farms, borders of poplar, patches of forest. Forest not like the Christmas tree forests of New Hampshire. This was broadleaf forest, leafless and gray. The land became more and more suburban as I got to the western part of the state. The sun, muted by overcast, had crept below the windshield visor as I approached St. Louis. It must have been around 4 o'clock. The arch, the gateway arch. I searched for it as I drove. I would have to stop and see it before I crossed the Mississippi. The highway was getting busy, and the signs for exits and junctions were getting close together and more confusing. I knew I needed to be on Interstate 70 after St. Louis. But I-70 crosses the Mississippi north of the arch and would not have such a good view. I had studied the map. I stayed on I-64, and then just before I crossed the river, there it was in front of me, the arch. The traffic was still not too bad. The road had a wide enough shoulder that I pulled over just to look. I knew it was illegal to stop on the interstate unless you had an emergency, but I figured if a cop stopped me, I would tell him that the car was making a strange sound, and I wanted to check it. I stopped, got out of the car, went back, and sat on the rear fender. There it was, the Gateway Arch. In a few minutes, I would be crossing the Mississippi River. I would be entering the real West. St. Louis, the home of Budweiser, the starting point for the westward expansion and the Transcontinental Railroad, Mark Twain's home state. This was Illinois. Okay, here's a picture. This is the picture of me, and you can see the Gateway Arch there in the distance. That's me sitting there on the suburbs of St. Louis, about to cross the Mississippi River. Okay. I hadn't expected it to be as cold as it was. There was no snow, but a dry wind swept the dead weeds in an endless field. Silver plumes of pampas grass waving in the wind. There it was, the Gateway Arch. Yes, the Transcontinental Railroad and all that high school shit. What the hell was I doing? I figured I'd better get back driving before a cop did come. So I got back in, started it up, and got back into the traffic. Sure enough, as I crossed the bridge, the arch was just outside my window. Just after crossing into St. Louis, there were signs for I-70 West. I took that route, which went north along the river through the city, and finally there was an on-ramp for I-70, and I headed west. A couple hours into Missouri, a couple hours into Missouri, I got a motel room for the night. I have no distinct memories of that motel or what town it was in, but the next day I do remember well. It was Thanksgiving Day. I started driving towards Kansas City in the morning. The weather report had said a big storm was coming. It would start with rain, then turn to snow. It was sweeping east from the Rocky Mountains. Kansas was smacking its path. I reached Kansas City by lunchtime. Crossing the Missouri River was less a momentous occasion for me than crossing the Mississippi had been. I crossed into Kansas. The night before I left New Hampshire, I had watched the movie The Day After at Pat Wrigley's house with Pat, Kevin, the Volvo guys from Colorado, and Chuck Lombardi. That was a TV special about what the world would be like after a nuclear war. Much of the story had taken place in Kansas City and nearby Lawrence, Kansas. And here I was, just west of Kansas City, coming up on Lawrence. Ground Zero in the movie. It was a scary movie, I supposed. Pat Wrigley had been very much affected by it. She had cried. I guess to me, it had not been surprising. I had no doubts that a nuclear war would be anything but a world ender. After I passed Topeka, sometime in the afternoon it began to rain, just a light drizzle. But I was worried that the road would freeze. That would be dangerous. I would stop at the next motel and get a room. The landscape of Missouri had been a patchwork of forest interspersed with farms, and the distance between towns never made me feel uneasy. But in Kansas, the land opened up wide. The only trees were those planted as windbreaks around farmsteads, and tufts of trees following the meandering courses of creeks into the distance. But mostly it was just rolling, treeless landscape, black soil and corn stubble. It was not as flat as I had expected, but once I crested those low, rolling hills, views of tremendous distance spread out before me. I imagined myself living there. Stephen, you're on your way to work. What kind of work is it? Do you work at a farm? Do you work at a truck stop? Do you work at the desk of a motel? The prospects scared me. I could see no sign of civilization ahead. No truck stop, no motel, no town, just land demarcated by farm roads into squares like a giant chessboard. Some squares green, most brown, some black. The wind was picking up, and the rain was turning to snow. Convoys of trucks rushed past me, each truck casting a curtain of slush onto my windshield. If the road froze with my bald tires, I could easily slide under those truck wheels. Quickly, the driving became dangerous. I hoped for that motel to come soon. And here's a picture. Here's a picture of driving west, snow, starting to be freezing rain and then snow in Kansas, hoping for a truck stop. I drove further and further with no sign of shelter. I began to see white on the landscape, snow now sticking. I just hoped that if there was a motel up ahead, sooner or later there had to be, that there would be rooms available. This was Thanksgiving Day. Would that be crowded or deserted? What would Thanksgiving be like at a truck stop? I wondered. Just like they say about cops, I said to myself. Motels are always around until you need one. Come on, motel. Come on, truck stop. Then there it was, a sign. Truck stop, 2 miles. Okay, that's the end of chapter 3. So I'm going to stop here.